When we think of a myth, what normally comes to mind straight away is fanciful tales of gods interacting with each other. A little bit like a fairy tale. But that's not what separates a myth from the Bible. It's not that a myth has these amazing events that could never actually happen in reality. What separates a myth from the Bible is the fact that they have a totally different understanding of reality. For a myth, everything is based around the idea of continuity. In the Bible, everything is based around the idea of transcendence. Now, one of the things we don't want to fall into the trap is thinking that myths only happened a long time ago. In fact, people actually live by myths today. They just call them very different things. So let's look at this whole idea of continuity to begin with. If we look at this diagram, we have a circle that represents everything that there is in reality. We have deity, we have humanity, and we have nature. Now, for a myth that is based around continuity, there is no hard and fast separations between these three areas. Humanity merges into deity, deity merges into nature, nature into humanity, and they interact with each other. So mankind is not completely separate from God or deity or the gods, in the same way that mankind is not totally separate from nature. It's as if we are all part of the same sort of thing, and one sort of morphs into the other, which morphs into the other. A modern day label that we can put onto this idea that one thing morphs from one thing to the next is pantheism. In pantheism, people are in the same essence as God, which is in the same essence as the natural things that we find around us. There is no distinction. Now, it's very hard for us to kind of really grasp that because we have grown up in a culture that is more influenced by transcendence. So let's give a practical example of this. Let's take the example of one of the Canaanite gods, Baal. Now, Baal was a fertility god. Here's a picture or an idol of what Baal looks like. And this is actually a relic that they managed to dig up the ground in the ancient Near East of Baal. Now, someone with mythological thinking, somebody who is thinking in the terms of continuity, doesn't see any separation between the actual idol of Baal and the god itself. So to do something to the idol is exactly the same thing as to do it to the god. It's not an image representing the god, it is actually the god itself. So if you sacrifice and give offerings to the idol, it is exactly the same as giving it to the god itself. Now let's take that one step further. Baal is also linked in with these storms and rain and sort of all the weather patterns. So to give something to this idol is also to give something to this god, Baal, which is also to somehow connect and manipulate and change the weather patterns. So if we want to change the weather and to bring on rains, so that's maybe the summer rains or the winter rains, what we do is we give offerings to the idol, which is the same as giving it to the god, which is the same as giving it to the storm and the clouds, so that they do what we want them to do. So there's this kind of relationship that sort of one thing morphs into the other, Now that's very different to what the Bible sort of pictures as how the world works. Let's look at this other circle, the one that focuses on transcendence. We have the sphere, which encompasses everything in the world, the material world. And notice it's divided into humanity and nature. And these things are very distinct. People are people, and they are very distinct to the world around us. So there is a functional difference between, say, a chair and a person. They are completely different things. A chair cannot be a person cannot be a chair. You cannot go up to a chair and do something to the chair and it affect a person like you can in the whole idea of continuity. Notice there's arrows there. They bounce off the walls. The deity is outside of creation. It is outside of the natural world. But the deity, the God, can transcend those boundaries and come break into the natural world and actually affect both nature and humanity. Notice that humanity cannot affect deity. Yes, we can pray to God, and that's what the Bible tells us that we can do. But we cannot twist God's arm. We cannot make God do what we want to do. This is in real stark contrast to the whole idea of the myth, which is based around continuity. In the mythical world, where you have continuity, you can do things to manipulate the gods. That is what's called magic. So you do these particular rituals, you sacrifice, you go through this procedure, and that affects the deity, that affects the gods, which then in turn affects nature, which gives us the things we want. You look at the Bible and the way the Bible presents things. God is in ultimate control. Yes, he's set things up to run in a particular way, and we have the laws of nature. But at any stage, he can step in and suspend those laws of nature and do exactly what he wants to do. We cannot control him, just like we cannot control the natural forces around us. We can't make it rain. We can't make volcanoes and earthquakes happen. We can't do that. What we can do is pray and plead for God to act on our behalf. But it is totally his will and his desire to do that for us. We cannot manipulate him in any way. So if we look at this chart here, we can see some huge differences between mythology and the Bible. First one, mythology is based around the whole idea of polytheism. There are many gods. There is not just one. There are many, many gods. In contrast, in the Bible, and all the religions that are based around the Old Testament scriptures, that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all based on the idea there is only one God. That's a very, very important distinction. All these three great monotheistic faiths come from the Bible and actually draw out of the scriptures. Every other religion is based around polytheism. The next one we notice is images. Now, in mythology, images are synonymous or exactly the same thing as the God itself. So there's no distinction between the idol that I have and the God that I worship. It is one and the same thing. In contrast, the Bible decries any sort of representation of God. You know, one of the things that the Israelites were commanded very, very strongly to do is make no graven images, no idols, no visual representation of who God is. Another distinct difference is in mythology there's the eternality of chaotic matter. Creation comes out of chaos that has always existed. In eternity past there is this thing called chaos, and creation comes out of that. The gods come out of that, and the gods in turn create everything that we know as matter. In contrast, for the Bible, there has always been God. God is the thing that is eternal, and God is the thing that creates from nothing. For polytheism, they have an extremely low view of the gods. The gods are really just like us. Maybe with superpowers and they can do amazing things, but really they are exactly like us. They have the same problems, they have the same jealousies, they have the similar weaknesses. They are really just like human beings on steroids. In contrast, the Bible depicts God as something completely other than human. We look at God, and one of the things that we notice is God is holy. And if we really look at that sort of distinction and the way the word holy is described in the Bible, it's saying God is other in an ultimate sense. There is nothing like God. God is someone who transcends, is completely different to everything else in the whole existing universe. He is other, he is holy. Going back to the whole idea of creation, mythology comes from the point of view that creation comes out of conflict. Life comes from the conflict between the gods wrestling with each other and vying for supremacy. And in the process, they create man and they create the whole world around us. In contrast, the creation account described in the Bible is based on order and the sort of reflection of God himself. God is a God of order, and he wants to create something out of nothing to reflect his character. And what he does is he creates something of order and beauty, and there is no chaos until mankind sins and brings that chaos into the world. As a result, the Bible has an extremely high view of humanity. Humanity is made in the image of God. We have something special that separates us from all the rest of creation, something unique. We, in a sense, capture a little tiny bit of the essence of God, and it's packaged up in the human form. In contrast with mythology, mythology views mankind as just another bit of creation, a servant of the gods, but no more than that. We are made for no higher purpose than to carry out the whims of God, of the gods, and that's sort of it. So there is no sort of prohibition against murder and some of the other things that the Bible talks about, because people are exactly the same as a plant, as a tree, as another animal. There's no distinction between humanity and the rest of creation. Because there are so many gods within mythology, there is no one single ethic to follow. In fact, it's probably not a good idea to completely follow what one god says, because in the process you might actually offend all the other gods that are out there. So you want to do kind of the bare minimum that you need to appease the gods and live in some sort of quasi-medium in between. Not offending one, but then not doing too much to please another, so you don't make them jealous. In contrast to the Bible, which every aspect of our lives is actually an ethical requirement to live within covenant with God, and to have that whole idea of how I treat my neighbor is a reflection of how I treat God, and the two I can't separate. So by cheating or stealing or doing something to somebody else, I am doing the same thing to God himself. See, that is really, really strong in the Bible, but comes nowhere near in mythology. In mythology, you can do whatever you like to other people. It doesn't really matter. As long as you go through the ritual practices to appease the gods, you can do whatever you like. It doesn't matter that you slaughter thousands of people. It doesn't matter that you cheat. It doesn't matter that you do all of these things. As long as you are ritually keeping the gods happy, that's all that matters. As a result, mythology is really focused on magic. Now remember, magic, the definition that we're using is that it is a manipulation of deity, of the spiritual realm. So in mythology, you're trying to do things in order to make the gods do what you want. It's kind of this wrestle between mankind and deity. Who's going to have the upper hand? In contrast, in the Bible, we cannot affect anything that God does. God is outside of us. He is independent of us. He doesn't have to do anything for us. And yet the amazing thing is he chooses to. He chooses to listen to us. He chooses to provide for us. He even adopts us into his own family. That's a huge difference than, say, the mythology sort of viewpoint, which says we are in this constant struggle between us and the gods, and we have to manipulate, and we have to trick them, and we have to do these magical elements in order to survive and get them to do what we want. Lastly, mythology is really obsessed with fertility and potency. If you read some of the ancient accounts of the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, one of the things that you will notice that time and time it comes up is the whole fertility idea and worshipping sexuality and everything connected with that. Remember, it comes back to that whole idea that you are trying to manipulate God into doing what we want him to do. We want him to provide crops in the ground. We want him to provide a family for us. So we do these rituals every year, and it's a lot of it's linked around actually ritual sexual activity. And we do that in a way to try to manipulate the gods into doing what we want. So if we act it out, in a way we're forcing the gods to act it out, which then forces nature to act it out, which is exactly what we want it to do. In contrast, in the Bible, God is supersexual. He is not male or female. Yes, he is described as a father figure in so much as it gives us a picture of what he's like. But he's not described as a male or as a female. God is kind of outside of those distinctions. Those distinctions are for created order, not for God himself. So the central difference between mythology and the Bible comes down to this idea of continuity and transcendence. Now, I've given a really brief sort of overview of continuity and transcendence. These concepts are quite sort of, they feel very academic. And if you want to spend some time really wrestling with it and getting a much better description than what I've just managed to do in these few short minutes, I suggest you read the book, The Bible Amongst the Myths by John N. Oswald. This is a fantastic book. I've already talked about it so far in this course, but I think if you really want to investigate this to a much deeper level, this is the book that you need to go to, because this will explain it in incredible detail and will help you wrestle with this whole idea of continuity and transcendence.